He held the door for her every morning. Then one day she didn't come. He always got there early, but it wasn't about being on time. It was about that moment when he opened the door and waited. It was small, unnoticed by most, but it meant something to him. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Every morning started the same. He'd park 2 blocks away, not because he had to, but because he liked the walk, liked watching the city wake up. The bakery across the street would already have its lights on, and the smell of fresh bread would drift out to the sidewalk. Traffic was light at that hour. The buses weren't full yet. The sidewalks were mostly empty except for a few regulars, dog walkers, joggers, delivery drivers unloading crates of coffee and milk. He liked the quiet before the noise, liked the rhythm of it. But most of all, he liked getting to the building just before 7:55. That was when she walked by. Same time every day, always by herself, always in a dark coat, with her ID badge already clipped to her bag. She never stopped to talk to anyone, never pulled out her phone, just walked with purpose, straight through the doors he held open. She never said anything at first, just gave a small nod, a glance, maybe the faintest smile. That was all. But over time it became a thing, a kind of routine, not something they talked about, not something either of them acknowledged, just something that happened every morning. He never asked her name. She never asked his. But the pattern never changed. He'd arrive, wait by the door, and when she came into view, he'd open it and stand back. She'd walk through, give that same nod, and keep going. And he'd step inside a few seconds later, take the elevator to the 7th floor, and start his day. He didn't know why it mattered. Maybe it was the consistency. Maybe it was the feeling of being noticed, even in silence. Or maybe it was because in a building full of people rushing past each other, they had found a moment that was quiet and respectful and never forced. The others didn't seem to pay attention. They came and went in groups, heads down, coffee cups in hand, earbuds in, conversations halfway started before they even got through the door. But he noticed. And he liked that she noticed too. There was something steady about it, something that felt like it belonged in the middle of all the rush. He'd sometimes catch himself looking up from his desk hours later, thinking about that moment by the door. Not because it was romantic. It wasn't. It wasn't anything like that. It was just simple, human. 2 strangers acknowledging each other every morning without ever needing to explain why. He didn't think she thought much of it, probably just appreciated the gesture. But for him, it had become a part of the day he didn't want to miss. If he was running late, even by a minute or two, he'd feel off. He'd walk faster, cut across streets, skip the usual stop at the newspaper stand, because he didn't want to miss her walking in. He didn't want her to get there and not find him holding the door. He didn't know what that said about him. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant more than he wanted to admit. Either way, it mattered. Some mornings were cold and gray. Some were bright and full of sunlight. Some were soaked with rain that made the sidewalks slick and the air heavy. But she always came. Same time, same pace, same nod. And he was always there, waiting. People walked past them like they didn't exist. And maybe they didn't, not to anyone else. But for those few seconds each morning, when the city was just starting to stir and the elevator lights flickered on behind the glass doors, they were the only 2 people who seemed to notice the moment. He never told anyone about it, didn't see the need. It was just a door, just a woman walking through, just a nod. But to him, it was something more. He didn't know when it shifted from routine to something he thought about outside the moment. It just happened. Quietly, like most things in his life. He still didn't know her name, still didn't know what floor she worked on or what she did, but he knew she always wore that same dark coat, even when the weather warmed. He knew she walked with even steps, never in a hurry, but never slow. He knew she held her bag close to her side and looked straight ahead, never distracted. And he knew that she noticed him. She didn't say much, never had, but she saw him every morning, and when she looked at him, it wasn't a passing glance. It was something more deliberate, small but real, like she was saying thank you without the words. He started noticing the little details, how her hair was always pulled back the same way, how she sometimes looked tired, like sleep hadn't come easy, how she always had a pen clipped to her bag strap, even though she never seemed to use it. He told himself he wasn't paying special attention, but he was. Not in a way that made him uncomfortable, just in a way that felt like he'd started to care. It wasn't like the movies. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was two people crossing paths at the same time every day. Nothing more. But it felt important. More important than he could explain. He started wondering what she did after she walked through the door. What kind of day she had. Whether she had anyone waiting for her at home. Whether she ever thought about him the way he sometimes thought about her. Like a quiet presence that had somehow become part of her routine. He thought about saying something once. Just a word. Just to break the silence. But he didn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because the silence felt like part of the whole thing. Breaking it might break whatever this was, and he didn't want that. There was something safe in the silence, something steady. One morning, the weather had turned fast. Cold rain swept across the street, the wind pulling at umbrellas and coats. He stood by the door, already wet from the short walk, water dripping from his sleeves. He wondered if she'd still come. She did. No umbrella, just her coat pulled tight and her head slightly bowed against the wind. He opened the door like always. She stepped through like always. But that morning, she looked up at him a little longer, and then she said it. Thank you. Just 2 words. Quiet, but clear. He looked at her, surprised. He nodded, like always, but this time his voice followed. You're welcome. She held his gaze for half a second longer, then walked on. He stood there longer than usual, watching the rain roll off the awning, the water pooling in the street. The door slowly closed behind him, and he didn't move. It wasn't much. It wasn't even a conversation. But it was the first time they'd spoken, and it stayed with him all day. He replayed it in his mind at lunch, on the walk back to his car, even when he was brushing his teeth that night. He didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. That thank you changed things. Not in a big way, not in a way anyone else would notice, but in a way that made the space between them feel smaller, less like 2 strangers, more like 2 people who understood something unspoken. He didn't expect anything more. But from that day on, when she nodded, there was something new behind it. Something warmer, something more familiar. And when he held the door, it no longer felt like just a habit. It felt like he was doing something that meant something, even if it was only to her, even if it was only to him. That was enough. It had been a week since she first said thank you, and he still thought about it every morning as he got ready for work. It wasn't the kind of moment that changed everything, not in the way people usually talk about change, but it had settled into him, quietly, like a light switched on in a room he hadn't noticed was dark. Nothing else had really changed. She still walked in at the same time, still gave the same small nod, still never stopped or said more. But now, every morning when he held the door, He waited, not just for her to walk through, but for the way her eyes would meet his, even if only for a second. It wasn't dramatic. There were no long looks or lingering smiles. It was just different, slightly, like the air had shifted, like there was something between them now that hadn't been there before. The others still rushed past, still talked loudly about meetings and emails and how long the line at the coffee shop had been. But when she came into view, everything else fell away. She didn't say thank you again, not with words, but she didn't need to. The way she looked at him now, that was enough. One morning, the elevator was down. A sign taped to the glass read, "Out of service." People groaned, shuffled toward the stairs. He stood by the door as usual, not moving, waiting. It was almost 7:55. She arrived right on time, like always. She looked at the sign, then back at him. For the first time, she smiled. Just a little. He smiled back. They walked inside together. Not side by side, still a few steps apart, but it was the first time they had entered the building at the same moment. He took the stairs, unsure if she was behind him or had gone to another stairwell. He didn't see her again that day. But the next morning, everything was back to normal. Elevator working, rain gone, and there she was again. She didn't smile this time, just nodded. He didn't mind. It didn't need to be more. He found himself thinking about how strange it was that two people could share the same small moment every day and know so little about each other. No names, no stories, just a door, a nod, and the few quiet seconds in between. He wondered if she ever told anyone about him, if she mentioned the man who held the door, if she thought it was odd, or maybe comforting, the way habits sometimes are. He didn't tell anyone about her, not because it was a secret, but because he didn't want to explain it. He didn't want anyone to misunderstand and make it into something it wasn't. It wasn't about attraction. It wasn't about romance. It was about consistency, about showing up, about being seen. And every time she walked through that door, he felt like those things mattered. One afternoon, as he was leaving the office, he passed by the coffee shop on the corner. He glanced inside, and for a moment, he thought he saw her sitting by the window. But it wasn't her. Just someone with the same coat, same posture. He kept walking, but for the rest of the evening he found himself wondering where she went after work, what her days looked like, whether she ever thought about him outside those few seconds in the morning. It surprised him how much space she took up in his thoughts. He wasn't sure what that meant. He wasn't sure if it had to mean anything. All he knew was that every morning when the door opened and she stepped through, something felt right. And that was enough. The weeks kept moving, and so did the routine. Same time, same place, same quiet nod. He stopped questioning why it mattered so much. He just accepted that it did. She always arrived just before 7:55, not a minute early, not a minute late. Her timing was exact, like it was part of who she was. And every time he saw her walking down the sidewalk, something in him settled. There was comfort in the repetition, in knowing what to expect, in knowing that, at least once a day, there would be a moment of calm in the middle of everything else. Some days she looked tired, some days more alert. But she never missed. Not once. Even when the weather turned colder again and the sidewalks iced over, she still came. One morning, he noticed her limp slightly, just for a step or two. Her pace slowed a little, and her eyes stayed down. When she reached the door, she didn't look at him the way she usually did. No nod, no glance, just walked through. He stood there a little longer than usual after she passed, watched her disappear toward the elevators. He wondered if she was okay, wondered if she was hurt, wondered if something had happened. He didn't know how to ask. He didn't even know if it was his place. That was the strange thing. They saw each other more consistently than most people saw their friends, but they didn't know anything about each other. Not really. And maybe that was why it worked. Maybe that was what made it feel safe. He kept showing up. So did she. And even when the small signs told him something might be off, like her limp or the way her eyes looked a little heavier, he didn't ask questions. He just held the door. That was what he could do. That was his part. Some days the streets were so crowded he almost missed her in the rush. But then she'd appear, right on schedule, weaving through the crowd, never breaking her pace. The city could be noisy and overwhelming, but when she stepped through the door, there was a kind of pause in it all. He started to think of it like a thread, something that connected the days. It didn't matter what the news was, how bad the traffic had been, or what kind of meetings were waiting. That moment, those few seconds at the door, gave the day shape. And it wasn't just about her anymore. He realized that. It had become part of how he started his day. Not just the act of holding the door, but the idea of making space for someone else, of showing up, of doing one small thing with consistency, even when nobody noticed. But she noticed. That part still mattered. He began to wonder what would happen if the routine ever broke. What if she stopped coming? What if she changed buildings, or jobs, or hours? He didn't like thinking about that. He didn't have a plan for how to handle it. For now, though, she still came. One morning she paused just slightly before walking in. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Then she gave a small nod, deeper than usual, slower. He nodded back. That was all. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a moment anyone else noticed. But to him, it meant everything. She saw him. He saw her. And the door stayed open. He got to the building at the usual time, a few minutes before 7:55. Same walk, same weathered routine, same spot by the door. He stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes on the sidewalk. She didn't come. He waited longer than usual, long enough that a few people gave him odd looks as they passed, long enough for the elevator bell inside to ding twice, long enough for him to start wondering if maybe she was just running late. But she didn't show. At 8:03, he finally stepped inside. The hallway was, as it always was, quiet, predictable, but the rhythm felt off. There was an emptiness to it now, like something had been left out, a part missing from a familiar tune. He rode the elevator up in silence, barely noticing the others who joined him. He stood in the back corner, staring at the floor numbers as they lit up. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. One missed day, could be anything, could be traffic, could be the weather, could be she took a different entrance. But deep down, he knew better. She never missed. Not once in all the months he'd stood at that door. That day moved slow. Work felt scattered. He checked the lobby security camera feed twice, pretending he needed it for a maintenance report. She hadn't come through the front entrance. Not at all. He told himself not to read into it, told himself people change routines all the time, but it stuck with him, all day, every hour. He left the building later than usual, walking a little slower, half watching the people on the street like she might be one of them. She wasn't. The next morning he showed up early, earlier than usual, just in case. The street was quiet. A few cabs passed, the bakery's lights were on, and the same scent of warm bread drifted through the air. The door felt cold in his hand as he waited. 7:55 came, then 7:56. She still didn't show. He kept watching the sidewalk, hoping for any sign. A familiar coat. That steady walk. Anything. Nothing. Eventually, people started passing by again, entering the building like always. The routine returned, but not for him. He held the door out of habit. But she wasn't there to walk through it. That second morning felt heavier than the first. By the third, he stopped pretending it was a fluke. She was gone. No warning. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. He didn't know where to put that feeling. Didn't know what to call it. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't grief. But it was something. It left a space behind, and he felt it. He still held the door every morning. Still showed up. Part of him couldn't let the routine go, even if the reason for it had vanished. The security guard noticed. "Waiting for someone?" he asked one morning, half smiling. "No," the man said. "Just habit." But it wasn't just habit. It was hope. Quiet, patient hope. The idea that maybe she'd come back. Maybe it wasn't permanent. Maybe something had come up. Maybe she was just away. Maybe. But deep down, even as he waited, he knew. Something had changed. And she wasn't coming back. The first week passed, and she didn't come. Every morning, he showed up at the same time, stood by the door, watched the sidewalk. Nothing. At first, it felt like waiting. Like she might round the corner any second, coat swaying with her usual stride, face calm, eyes steady. He watched the clock, watched the street, held the door open longer than he needed to, but by the fifth day, it didn't feel like waiting anymore. It felt like absence. He didn't know why it hit so hard. She hadn't been in his life in any real way. No phone number, no email, no shared memories outside those morning seconds. But still, she had become part of the structure. A point in the day that everything else seemed to center around. Now, without her, the day didn't start the same. It felt off, unbalanced. He kept holding the door anyway. People passed through without thinking. Some gave him a nod. Some didn't notice at all. But none of them were her. He started noticing other things instead. How loud the street seemed now. How fast people walked. How little eye contact anyone made. The door opened and closed, and every time it did, it reminded him of what wasn't there. It wasn't just about missing her face. It was the stillness she brought with her, the quiet moment that made the morning feel less mechanical, less rushed, like the day had room to breathe. Now, it was just noise again. At night, he found himself thinking about her more than he wanted to admit. Not about who she was, not really, but about the way she made him feel noticed. The way a routine had turned into something he looked forward to. Something that made him feel like he mattered, even just for a second. That was gone now, and it hurt more than he thought it would. He thought about asking someone at the front desk, thought about checking the tenant list to see if he could figure out what floor she worked on. But what would he say? "Hey, there was a woman who walked through this door every morning. I don't know her name, but I noticed when she stopped coming." It sounded strange, maybe even inappropriate. So he kept it to himself. Just kept showing up. Just kept hoping. On the 9th day, he got there early. Earlier than ever. He stood under the awning, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the corner. The sun was still low. The sidewalk was mostly empty. And still, she didn't come. He let out a slow breath, felt the cold in his lungs, looked down at the pavement. She was gone. That was the truth now. Not late, not off schedule. Gone. And there was nothing he could do about it. The world kept moving. The door kept swinging open. The city didn't care who noticed what. But he did. He cared. And that was the part he couldn't shake. He was halfway through his coffee when the security guard called out to him from the front desk. "Hey," the guard said, holding up a small envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you." He stood up slowly, confused. "For me?" The guard nodded. "Yeah. A woman brought it by earlier this morning. Didn't give a name, just said to make sure you got it." He took the envelope. It was plain. No stamp, no return address. Just his first name, written in neat handwriting across the front. He stared at it for a few seconds, then looked back at the guard. "Did she say anything else?" The guard shook his head. "Nope. Just said you'd understand." He turned the envelope over in his hands. The paper was slightly creased, like it had been carried around for a while. He hesitated for a moment before slipping a finger under the seal and opening it. There was a single sheet of paper inside, folded once. No card, no decoration, just a simple, handwritten note. He read it once, then again. "Hi. You don't know me, not really, and I don't know you either. But I wanted to say thank you. I've been walking through that door every morning for over a year, and every morning you were there, holding it open, always early, always steady. I never said much. I didn't know how, but I noticed. Every day. There were some hard days. You wouldn't have known. I didn't show it. But I was going through a lot. Quiet things. Heavy things. That moment by the door, it helped. It grounded me. Gave me something to rely on. Even if it was just for a few seconds, it meant something. It reminded me that there are still good people in the world. That even when everything else felt uncertain, there were small things that stayed the same. You were one of those things. I've taken a new job, moved out of the city. It all happened fast, and I didn't get a chance to say anything in person. But I couldn't leave without saying this. You made a difference. And I wanted you to know. Thank you for holding the door." That was it. No name, no phone number, just those words. He sat down in the nearest chair, the note still in his hand. The paper felt heavier than it should have. His eyes stayed on the last line. "Thank you for holding the door." He didn't know what to think. Didn't know how to explain the feeling that settled in his chest. It wasn't sadness exactly, and it wasn't joy either. It was somewhere in between. Something like quiet understanding. He folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. For the first time in over a week, he didn't feel like he was waiting anymore. Now he knew. She was gone, but not without a word. She had noticed. All those mornings, she had seen him. And now, so had he. He read the note again the next morning. Same chair, same coffee, same quiet lobby. It was just a single page, but it felt like more than that. It explained everything he'd been wondering, everything he hadn't been able to ask. She was gone. Not because something happened, not because something was wrong, just life moving in a new direction, a new job, a new place. No warning, no last glance. But she hadn't forgotten. That part stayed with him. She could have walked away without saying anything. Most people would have. But she hadn't. She left a note. And that meant something. He thought about how easy it would have been for her to let the routine fade out. Let him wonder. Let him keep waiting, day after day, unsure if he was the only one who had felt it. But she didn't do that. She had remembered the mornings. Remembered the way he stood by the door. Remembered that it mattered. He folded the note again and tucked it back into his coat pocket. It stayed there the rest of the day. He didn't tell anyone about it. Didn't show it to the guard or bring it up in conversation. It felt like something that wasn't meant to be shared, like something personal, just between the two of them. It had answered the questions, but it had done something more too. It had given him peace. He kept thinking about the line. There were some hard days, quiet things, heavy things. He didn't know what those things were, didn't need to. He just knew that for a stretch of time, his small action had made something easier for someone else. Not by doing anything big, not by trying to fix anything, just by being there, just by holding the door. He'd never thought about kindness in that way before, how something so small, so simple, could carry weight. She hadn't needed advice. She hadn't needed a speech. She had just needed consistency. A second of stillness. A sign that not everything was shifting under her feet. And without realizing it, that's what he had given her. He thought about the way she used to walk, focused, quiet, steady. And now he understood. She wasn't ignoring him. She wasn't cold. She was surviving. And somehow the routine had helped her do that. It made him think differently about other things too, about the people he passed every day. The man who cleaned the lobby floors before sunrise, the woman who ran the coffee cart on the corner, the guy who stood at the bus stop, always reading the same worn paperback. He started to wonder what their routines meant to them, what they were carrying, what small things helped them feel like the world wasn't slipping out from under them. He didn't start talking to everyone, didn't make a big show of it, but he started paying more attention. The people you see every day, the ones you don't think you know, they might be carrying something you can't see. And sometimes the smallest things you do matter more than you ever find out. This time he had found out. He had held the door, every morning, without knowing why. Now he knew, and that changed everything. The next morning, he showed up at the same time, just like always. Same coat, same walk, same spot by the door. She wasn't coming. He knew that now. There was no more wondering, no more waiting. But he held the door anyway. Not for her this time, for whoever needed it. A young man in a wrinkled suit walked through first, nodding without looking up. Then two women deep in conversation. Then a delivery guy hauling boxes. All of them passed without slowing down. He didn't mind. He wasn't holding the door for recognition. He was holding it because it had come to mean something more. For a while, it had been about her, the moment they shared each morning, the small, steady connection that had become part of his life. Now, it was about what that moment had taught him. That kindness doesn't need to be loud. That showing up, even in small ways, can matter more than you'll ever know. He kept the note in his coat pocket, folded, worn at the edges. He didn't take it out as much now. He didn't need to. The words had already settled into him. They were part of his day, like the air, like the noise outside, like the feel of the door in his hand. He looked at the sidewalk out of habit, even though he knew she wouldn't be there. Still, something about the morning felt full. Not empty like before. Not incomplete. Just different. There was peace in it now. He didn't need her to come back for the routine to have meaning. And maybe that was the part that stayed with him the most. That something so small, just holding a door, had helped someone through a hard season of life. Not because he meant to, just because he was there. He didn't talk about it, didn't bring it up. The world around him moved fast, and people were focused on their own things. But he kept doing it. Every morning. Same time. Same place. One day, someone else might notice. Someone new. Someone who needs a steady moment in the middle of the noise. And he'll be there. Not waiting for thanks, not looking for recognition, just holding the door. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.